Okay, we're good to go now. We had a little delay there. I forgot to slide the new lesson, the new old lesson in the box, and the power was off, so it took a little longer to get everything going here, or had been off, went off. So we're ready to get started now. And since I didn't have time to hand anybody the microphone, I'll just lead us in prayer. So let's bow. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful that we can be here tonight. We're thankful for the life-sustaining rain. We pray, Father, that it would do much good for us here in this area. We pray, Father, for those in some parts of our country who have had flooding and have had tragedies. And we pray, Father, for the best of them in their recovery and for comfort for those who are suffering. We'd ask you to be with us tonight as we continue to think about the wisdom that you've given us in dealing with money, with our possessions. We pray, Father, that we will learn from this and that we will be more equipped to avoid the pitfalls that come with the things of this world. Father, be with those of our number that are dealing with health issues, other problems. Comfort them, give them strength that comes from you. Help us to be alert to those needs that they have. Bless us as we study your book of Proverbs this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I was waiting to see if Randy Grow walked in, because as those of you who were here last Wednesday night know, that's why we're still talking about Proverbs, wisdom, and money. Because he raised a question and got it going. He didn't apologize for that at all. He said if I ever need him to do that again, he'd be glad to get discussion going. We did have a good discussion, though, and we're going to move on from that. Hopefully everybody shared what they wanted to share last week, and we'll deal with other topics dealing with wisdom and money. Number 3 tonight, and what I was planning to be a one Wednesday evening lesson, but because of the discussion, we're doing this, and that's okay. Right here is the next one after where we were discussing last week. He who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. As far as we can tell here, we have a parallel, synonymous parallelism. That is, both these phrases saying basically the same thing. The person who is living to be just to enjoy the good things, and that's their whole goal in life, they're probably going to wind up without much. They will not make good decisions. They'll not look ahead. They have no delayed gratification sense of that. And then the second half comes to basically the same conclusion. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. If those things are what is in a person is looking for, then the insight to have those is probably going to be overlooked. The ability to work hard, to make good decisions. In other words, if the focus is upon having everything we want instead of being productive, then we're probably going to end up not with whether it be pleasure in a general sense or whether it be riches defined by wine and oil. Those things, if that's the pursuit that we have, we're not going to get the result that we want. One person in commenting on this said this would be what we would describe today as perhaps the person who likes to party, the person who wants the fruits of working hard, perhaps, the fruits that someone who has earned what they have would enjoy, but all they want is to pursue pleasure. And they'll not have those fruits for very long because they will be squandered. So we'll move on then, and we're going to move into chapter 21 a little further down here, because there's several things in chapter 21 of Proverbs that are good. Verse 20, there is desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man squanders it. So that's the difference in having and not having sometimes. Wisdom or foolishness. Whether there's a sense of working hard, being a good steward, saving what you have, or squandering it. Now, back in those days, oil was a way of measuring wealth. It wasn't the only way, but you didn't have to have gold and silver, have particularly to be considered well to do. If you had enough olive trees that produced oil to sufficient extent, you could well be considered a wealthy person because it was a commodity that would have been a staple in everybody's lives and would have been traded for anything that you needed. So it was a measured, it was like money in the bank. They used oil for so many things. They used oil in religious ceremonies, of course. They used oil for cosmetic purposes. They used oil for medicinal purposes. They used oil in their cooking, olive oil I'm talking about, and they used olive oil in their little lamps that they used. When we read about some translations mistakenly, will use the word candlestick. And even, I think, well, anyway, that we let it go with that. But it's really oil lamps, just olive oil poured into them and a little hole into the lamp where a wick, some kind of material, cloth material was pushed, and olive oil was the fuel for that. So olive oil was so much a part of people's lives that oil was, if you had oil in your dwelling, you were doing pretty well. That was a good sign. And if you had a lot of oil, it would be like a treasure. This is a desirable treasure, oil in the dwelling of the wise. The wise person is the one who doesn't squander it. The foolish man squanders it and would be looking for somebody else to get their oil from, like the foolish virgins, perhaps, in Jesus' parable. So the idea of using good judgment in what we have. The idea of having stuff is not wrong. Proverbs is very clear about that. It suggests the advantages of having something, having things. The danger lies in the misuse of those things. But certainly they're not to be squandered. This next one, 25 and 26, is another one of those that we've talked about before in that it can be taken a couple of ways, but we get to the same principle basically either way. The desire of the lazy man kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. Now, before I say anything, somebody tell me how you interpret that. The desire of the lazy man. What does that word desire refer to there? I'm sorry? But what is he desiring? What is he desiring? Stuff, material items. Okay. Okay. That's one way that people have understood it. I spoke of this or okay. What other way could it be taken though? What other desire might there be? What does a lazy man desire? You know, we talked about slothfulness a few weeks ago. What does a lazy man desire? Do nothing, an easy life. So it could be understood that the desire to be lazy, the desire to just lay in the hammock in the shade all day long and not do anything is going to kill a person, either literally or in the long run, or perhaps just as we would suggest today in a psychological way. It could be that kind of desire. Either one of those is true. A person could desire the easy lifestyle so much that it winds up being destructive, or he could desire the things that he would have if he worked if he labored with his hands, but his hands refused to labor, not because there's anything wrong with him, but because he is a lazy man by the definition of the parable of the proverb. So either one of those gets us to the same outcome. Slothfulness is not going to bring us to the desire that we want. Now, the next verse says, he covets greedily all day long, but the righteous gives and does not spare. Okay, so he referring back to this lazy man. He he covets greedily. So it really still doesn't answer the question that we had about desire. He definitely would like to have the things that other people have because of their labors, but he doesn't have them. He covets. Okay, so there's the attitude of the lazy man. He covets. But now there's this person who is righteous, and instead of coveting, what does he do? Instead of looking at other people and saying, I really want that right there. If I don't want theirs, I at least want one just like theirs. I want as much as they have. Okay, that would be the coveting man, the lazy man, whose hands are just not going to get it for him. The righteous says he gives and does not spare. He looks at people who do not have what he has, and he's willing to help them out. The opposite attitude. So another contrast, which is common in the book of Proverbs, the lazy man and the righteous man, and how they look at the things that others have. The lazy man just kills him. The righteous man, it causes him to feel compassion and to act compassionately. All right, continuing into chapter 22 now. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. Okay, let's stop right there because we've almost got two separate points here we want to make. That's pretty obvious to us, isn't it? Pretty specific. Which is better, having a lot of wealth or having a good reputation in the world? Good reputation. Assuming it's a genuine, and I believe that's what the wise man's talking about here. It is a reputation that had been earned by righteous living. What would we rather have? When it gets tough, are people going to look to us because we're rich? Or are people going to look to us and say, now, there's a man with a good reputation, so I'd rather turn to him? The good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. And people would be more likely to be inclined to help us, perhaps, inclined to respect us, and so forth. Darryl? Okay. Yeah, it reminds us of the young man feeding the pigs again, doesn't it? Darryl said a guy loses his riches, he hasn't got much left if he has no reputation, does he? Guy has a reputation, still people would look at him, and if he didn't have anything, they'd say, well, he's a worthwhile fellow, and be inclined to help. Recognize him as someone who's worth giving assistance to, perhaps. Yeah, and that's the thing here, really, isn't it? Ken says a person will often sacrifice a reputation to get riches, and yet you're trading something that's very valuable for something that's not very valuable, really. At least not of equal value. If you put them on the old balance scales, the reputation outweighs the riches every time. And loving favor, that is a disposition of people looking at you with approval and with respect, as opposed to the opposite of that. That's more important than silver and gold on that set of scales. Now, let's go to the second verse there, but that's a little bit different. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. And I'm not sure everybody walks away from that one with the same ideas. It seems to suggest that really, rich or poor, we all have some things in common. We need each other. You know, the world is made up of both categories, and it's not like, you know, here's one that's expendable, and here's one that's isn't. Here's one that's better. Here's one that's worse. It's like, you know, the Lord's the maker of us all. And when it comes to inherent value, we're not talking about how much we have, whether it be the rich or the poor. We're talking about the fact the Lord made us all, and we have something of value because of that. We are each valuable because of that. We'll pause in just a minute. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. This, it would seem, is an indication of how the poor have very little choice and how the rich have a great deal of choice. And it could be taken kind of in a negative or a positive sense here. It depends on what kind of character the rich person has, how the poor person might or might not suffer. But the fact is, the poor person is left, or the borrower is left, without a lot of freedom to make choices because they are so dependent on the one who is rich and rules over them. And many times that is definitely a negative because the one who rules over them is not the type of person they should be. And some of these proverbs that we'll look at talk about that a little later. Okay, let's stop right there with 22:7. And we're still going to look at some more in chapter 22 because it's filled with them. Any comments? None so long as last week's now, but any comments or ideas so far? I'm just kidding. If you have something we really need to be discussing, we'll discuss it. Mhm. Moderation in terms of what we have. It's neither right nor wrong to be rich. It's neither right nor wrong to be poor. But as we've talked about a couple of times over the past couple of weeks, you know, it's how we get it and how we use it. Whether money is a pitfall for us or money is a blessing that we can share with others. And remember one of the verses that we use as a key verse to start out with. The prayer that we might do well to have is, Lord, give me enough so that I don't resort to stealing, but don't give me so much that I forget about you. You know, give me what I can handle. And then we can leave it to the Lord to define the word, how much I can handle. If we do that, then we'll be all right because he knows how much we can handle. He knows when we pray, if we pray to win the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, he knows whether we can handle that or not. You know, we don't have to worry about, man, should I or should I not? You know, well, the Lord take care of that. He'll answer our prayer according to what he knows we can handle. So we can be thankful for that. Give me what I need, but don't give me so little I steal. Don't give me so much that I forget you. All right, let's move on with chapter 22. He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. Pretty straightforward there. The word generous suggesting bountiful, overflowing, plenty. And of course, the eye represents the person's point of view, the way the person's looking at it, the characteristic of their heart, their thinking. If I have a generous eye, I'm looking to be able to bless others. And therefore, I will. He gives of his bread to the poor. So that is held up to us as a as a positive characteristic. All right, still in chapter 22. He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty. And remember again, I know we've said it several times, but always remember that the Proverbs are general observations of truth. It doesn't mean 100% of the time this happens. Sometimes people violate God's will as it's expressed in these Proverbs about money, and they don't answer in this life. But a lot of times they do. Generally they do. And that's the observation that Solomon's making. First of all, he who oppresses the poor to increase his riches. That's wrong. We haven't got to the consequence yet. Let's stop with that one, though. Oppresses the poor to increase his riches, something that God was constantly, through his prophets, telling his people not to do. Don't take advantage of those people that can't help themselves, that you can take advantage of just because you've got money or you've got power. Don't oppress them to your financial benefit. So that was wrong and will surely come to poverty. That'll catch up with the person. Also, he who gives to the rich. And I think we've kind of gone around this subject before in previous Proverbs. He who gives to the rich doesn't simply mean somebody who gives to the rich something he's supposed to do, somebody who does business with the rich, but rather it implies someone who gives to the rich in order to do what? Get position or gain of some kind. And probably to do that to the detriment of those who don't have very much, right? Instead of looking out and being compassionate, seeing people who are in need, you say, well, I'm going to give this to the king. I'm going to give this to the governor because then I'll get something out of it. It's a whole lot like we talked about early on in talking about Proverbs and money. So either way, whether oppressing the poor in a direct way, if you have the power to do it, or buying some kind of favor through bribery under the table, surely will come to poverty in a general sense. We continue there with 26 and 27. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is surety for debtors. Debts. Remember, we've talked about this in a couple of other verses, and we notice, and I remarked how surprised I was. I never really noticed how much Proverbs says, don't be somebody's guarantee on a loan. Don't be co-signing for people. You know, you get yourself in trouble. It's just something that's dangerous. Don't be shaking that hand in a pledge for debt. They generally don't go into debt too easily or too quickly, too casually, because that's a dangerous thing. So that is said here again. But notice, if you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? That's what could happen. Now, according to what we read in, we mentioned this last one, what were you not to take away take from a person and keep it as collateral for a loan? Their coat, because that might be the only garment, the only thing they had to make a bed out of. Now here we're talking about a literal bed, we believe, but the coat, the outer garment, that might have been somebody's bed. All they had to give a little bit of comfort and a little bit of warmth. Exodus 22 says, don't do that to your brother. You know, at the end of the day, you don't say, well, you still owe me money. You can't have your cloak, your outer garment. Well, that was taking advantage, putting them in a different. Well, here, for people, don't shake hands on behalf of somebody else for these frivolous debts, because what if you have nothing to pay? You take away the bed which is under you. And if you had a family, what else might you do? Take away the beds that are under them, right? You know, we have somebody who, a modern day situation, someone who gets his or her paycheck and then goes out and wastes it before they even go home in some frivolous and probably sinful activity. and then they come home, they don't have it. What does your family do? They suffer because of that. So this man here could indebt himself to someone, wind up having to pay and losing that which even affects his family. Lose the bed from under you. Pretty significant, pretty serious thing there. So don't get into that situation to begin with. Now, along with here, which I think is rather, I read and I did any of the others that we're talking about. Let's go through it all and then come back. Do not overwork to be rich, because of your own understanding cease. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. Do not eat the bread of a miser, nor desire his delicacies. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. You've heard that before, haven't you? And perhaps even taken out of context a little bit. Proverbs 23:7. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Well, there's a specific context to that, and we're in it right now. Although the principle, I suppose, could be used in a lot of other things. The heart is reflected in the actions. Okay, the miser says, eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. The morsel you have eaten, you will vomit up and waste your pleasant words. Now, this one is very interesting because of the way it's been translated in different settings. For instance, this translation right here is from Hebrew, the translation in Hebrew of the Old Testament scriptures. And it suggests that we have somebody here who's going to eat with perhaps a host who's begrudging it. We have a picture here. Somebody says, oh yes, come and eat. Come to my table. I want to be hospitable to you. And yet, he was resenting it the whole time this person was eating. And the message in that understanding would be, well, you're not going to really enjoy it. You know, the fact that he resents that, he's being hospitable because he has to, but he really resents that. You'll pay for this in the end. You won't really enjoy it. It won't be a pleasant meal because your host is begrudging you. That's one possibility. Now you say, why would a host serve him then if they were begrudging? If the host was really a miser anyway, why would he say, come on and eat at my table to a guest? Well, that's because back in Bible times, in that part of the world, hospitality was a much more demanding thing than it is today. If somebody comes to visit us, we might say, would you like a cup of coffee or, Coke or something like that, a glass of ice water? Back then, hospitality was so important to their culture that you really couldn't afford. You really shamed yourself if you didn't provide hospitality in a pretty significant way. Do you remember the parable that Jesus tells about the friend knocking on a friend's door? And it's a message of persistence in prayer. So keep on asking God. Don't stop. Well, that really is maybe hard for us to understand outside of the culture, because when a friend came, you had to be hospitable to him. He's knocking on the door, said, I've got to have some bread. Give me 3 loaves of bread. I've got a visitor coming. Wasn't expecting him. I don't have anything to set before him. Well, in that culture, if you were to be a good host, you had to set 3 items in front of a guest to be hospitable. Otherwise, you'd have the reputation. You'd go down in everybody's opinion when the word got around. Here's somebody who's not hospitable to a stranger, a visitor who came. You didn't give him 3 things. It might be 3 loaves of bread. It might be bread and pomegranates and whatever, whatever food was available. But that was a duty. That was pretty much a sacred duty in that part of the world. So what we have here is a miser who's painted as someone who had to be hospitable, I mean, after all, what will people say? But he begrudged every bite that visitor took. Every time he chewed up something, every time he took a piece of his bread or a piece of one of his fruits, he resented it. And the message is, probably ought to be careful who you eat with, who you accept hospitality from, because it may not taste so good in the long run. Now, that's one understanding of this verse, and that's the way it's translated here in this particular, the New King James translation in English. Another translation, which is also possible and certainly could be biblical, is, and the wording, of course, is different in that, and you may have a translation that reflects that. The Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures and the Talmud, the book of Jewish of oral tradition, and the commentary about that oral tradition, both suggest that this ought to be worded in such a way as to say we have a host who is giving something to someone, but all the time the guest is being rude about it. The guest is not accepting it graciously. The guest is an undesirable person, and talking about how terrible things are. And it really is the guest who's saying these things about, vomit it up, and you're not going to be able to make a good impression on this guest because he just doesn't really appreciate it. And of course, that would be true too, if that would be the correct understanding of the text there. That would be a true principle too. Sometimes good is done for someone and they just sort of throw it right back in your face. You can feed them a meal and they don't appreciate it. You can do something kind to them and they'll respond in a perhaps even a vicious way, at least an unappreciative way. So, as I say, either one of those is a biblical principle, whichever way we understand that. Any comments on it? We didn't really talk much about it flying away like an eagle, but we picture, isn't that the way we picture possession sometimes and money? Where does it go by the end of the month? Where did it go? It's like it flew away, So they saw things that way too back then. It's a fleeting thing, and even at best, of course, it's a fleeting thing. Okay, let's keep going so we might get finished. Maybe chapter 27. Whoever keeps the fig tree will eat its fruit, so he who waits on his master will be honored. In other words, service, duty, diligence, allegiance will bring up good reward. You take care of a fig tree, and you about to say it will take care of you. You'll get the fruit off of it, usually, because you provided what it needs, it grows, and you'll get fruit from it. Same way with waiting on someone that you're working for. Waits on the master, and you'll be honored because that you're doing the master's will. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So service and labor are going to be rewarded. Now the next one, interesting. Hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. One of the things that heaven and hell have in common, in this sense at least, are their capacity, right? Nowhere does either one, heaven or hell, say there's a limit. We fill up heaven, we fill up hell. No such thing. That's not a concept that we're given. There are two places, and they're made by God to serve the purposes that they're made. So we have a bottomless pit when we talk about hell and destruction. Never full. Well, the wise man is saying this is the way it is for the one who would be rich. Remember 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. Somebody read that for us if you would. 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. And let's notice the person that we're talking about here. Notice the specific description. It's not those who are rich, those who turn out to be rich. It's those who desire to be rich. It is not money that is the pitfall. It is the love of money. And we have to be sure and get those understandings before us. It's an attitude that Paul is talking about to Timothy there. It's an attitude. It's a person who will be rich, would be rich, desires to be rich, depending on what translation you're reading. And there's never any satisfying, because the desire is for more and more. It's a bottomless pit, just like hell. Yes, sir. 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. So there's no filling it up. There's no satisfaction. And Old Testament, New Testament principle, eternal principle, as far as mankind is concerned with things. If that's what we're after, there's never going to be enough. Just like the bottomless pit will never be filled up either. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one perverse in his ways, though he be rich. That's a whole lot like the other than we talked about, isn't it? The idea of a good reputation, a good name is better than silver and gold, loving favor and great riches. It's just better. So here we have it. The idea is one who walks in integrity and may not have very much, but he's living right. And he will have, at least to some extent, a good reputation. He may not be known by as many people because he's not rich, but the people that know him, there goes an honest man, a man of integrity. Whereas one who's perverse in his ways, even though he's rich, as someone said a while ago, well, you let those riches go, and the friends would probably go with him. One who increases his possessions by usury and extortion gathers it for him who will pity the poor. In other words, in a general sense, if the intent is to get possessions any way that I can, it's probably going to come to a bad end, and somebody else will wind up with what I had. That's the idea there. Someone who knows how to use it better than I do. It'll fall into the hands of someone who is compassionate, someone who pities the poor. And I meant to have one more comment about Proverbs 28:6 there too. Let me go back what we said on the slide. The perverse man is literally the crooked man. And it's at the idea of two different ways. Something that could be woven together, crooked, or walking two different ways. And as I read that, I thought about what James talks about in James 1 in verse 8. The double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. The double-minded man wants two things. He wants what the world has to offer, but he's not unmindful of what's right. And that could well be the case here. The person who is perverse in his ways, he's going two different directions. He's double-minded in that sense. Let's go on. We're just going to get finished. The rich man is wise in his own eyes, but the poor who has understanding searches him out. In other words, it doesn't mean that you're highly intelligent because you're rich, and it doesn't mean that you're not intelligent because you're poor. The rich often have an inaccurate view of themselves, don't they? Whereas the poor man, he sees the real world every day. He may have a real good understanding of the way things are in his world and understand the rich man better than the rich man understands himself, who's wise in his own eyes because he's blinded by possessions. A ruler who lacks understanding is a great oppressor, but he who hates covetousness will prolong his days. How many kings of Israel, the divided kingdom of Israel, were good? Right. You know what their average reign was? 11 years. You go over to Judah, the kingdom of Judah, and the kings that were considered righteous. There weren't too many of them, but there were some. You know what their average reign was? Anybody got a guess? 31 is what I did the math on the little chart that I had in there. 31. years. So who generally lasts longer? As an oppressive ruler, or one who hates covetousness, one who's a person of integrity and who wants to do what's right, in this case, what's right in God's eyes. Okay, a faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. The idea of hastening to be rich goes right along with the idea of being an extorter, one who uses usury, one who is not honest in his dealings. But the faithful man receives blessings, the opposite in character of the second phrase, who hastens to be rich. A man with an evil eye hastens after riches. The word evil there means an envious eye, in one sense. An envious eye hastens after riches, does not consider that poverty will come upon him because of his behavior. And then finally, we've talked about this so many times, we don't really have to say a lot. He who gives to the poor will not lack, but he who hides his eyes will have many curses. And we've seen that in various different words already. So I appreciate that. Next week, we're going to go on to wisdom and another topic within the book of Proverbs. And we will have spent a good bit of time on wisdom and money.